Last week, I spoke about the Beit HaMikdash, right? And, certain very important ideas about the Beit HaMikdash, you see. And there were two ideas which I had said, and it's worthwhile just repeating them. One idea was that when God said to him, I want you to record the dimensions of the Beit HaMikdash, the third one. So, of course, Yechezkel said, they're going into Golus. Why would they want to know about the third Beit HaMikdash? And what God, of course, alluded to was that this period of Golus, Galut, is really a third preparation, third device that will do the tikkun. So therefore the teaching of this third Beis HaMikdash indicates that there will be a Beis HaMikdash, and that this period of Golus really is a tikkun for that, you see. And so that was a very important idea. I also mentioned, very important idea, that what the third Beis HaMikdash really is the Beit HaMikdash, the Mailo, the upper Beis HaMikdash, actually comes down and becomes a portal, a window, from which the upper, the Uris, the light, the Kedusha of the upper Beis HaMikdash now merges with and becomes part of the third Beis HaMikdash. And that's why it is really built by the Rabbi Shalom, the third Beis HaMikdash. And that is why also, which is very important, that is why in the Messianic era, there's so much incredible amount of awe, because you're looking at the Beis HaMikdash in heaven that has now connected with and become the third Beis HaMikdash here. And therefore that allows for the entry of enormous amount of Kedusha and Hasaga, tremendous amount of knowledge as a result of that. So those were the two ideas which I had mentioned last week, which are in many ways very important, and so on. Now I just wanted to mention and continue on that theme. Really, when you think about it, you see, there are several ways that one can bring the Mashiach. And I just wanted to go over them. And also we will see that one of the ways is the Avodah, the actual service of the Beis HaMikdash, you see. And that's one of the ideas. First, the first idea there is a midrash. It's well known, where Avram Avinu, by the Bris Ben Absarim, when God is making an agreement with Avram Avinu in Breshit, and the Rebbeinu Shem tells him that your children, they're destined to do what? To do the mitzvot, and I, of course, will give them Eretz Yisrael, and ultimately the whole Olam Haba, future world. So what Avram Avinu said was, Bamo Eda, well, how do I really know that this will happen? Why? Because he reasoned that what happens if they don't do it? What happens if they sin? So he said to God, well, what happened to the Mabul? Which means that they also were supposed to do the Tikkun, and obviously they failed. So what did God do? He destroyed the entire world. So what Avram Avinu said was, well, how do I know that my descendants, it's nice that you're giving them the job of Tikkun, but how do I know that they will not sin? Because if they sin, maybe you'll destroy them also, and you'll give it over to some other nation, you see. So the Rebbeinu Shem told him that I am going to put in place a way to do tshuva. especially a way to do tshuva in terms of the Beis Hamikdash. In other words, there will be korbanos, there will be sacrifices, and what the sacrifices will do is will bring them a kapara, which is a very important concept. The whole idea of korbanot, the offerings in the temple. So what the Rambam told Avram Avinu is what? Is that when they bring a korban, especially a chatos, which is a certain process of korban, there's an osham, there's an oilo, shlomim, mincho, nesech, and so on, all of these korbanos have intrinsically involved in them a kapara. So that's what the Rambam told Avram Avinu. I have put in place a way that they can achieve an atonement for their sins. So Avram Avinu said to the Rebbeinu Shalom, he said, this is good as long as the Beit HaMikdash survives. But Avram Avinu saw prophetically that it won't survive. It will be destroyed. So he said to Rebbeinu Shalom, well, when it's destroyed, then what will the Jews do? Right? There's no Beit HaMikdash. And if there's no Beit HaMikdash, then you cannot achieve a kapara, an atonement, a forgiveness, right, without a Beit HaMikdash. So then how do I know that you will allow them to survive? And what the original question comes back. Maybe we'll destroy them, give the teeth. See. That's what he said. So the Moshe told him something which is a tremendous concept. He said the following. He said that if somebody learns korbanot, in other words, he learns what's called the Torah of korbanos, where he learns all about the offerings, the sacrifices of the Beis Hamikdash, then I will consider it as if he brings those korbanos. That's what God said, which is an astounding concept. Normally, there's a mitzvah of limud Torah. You learn Torah. That's a mitzvah. You see, it's really the greatest of the mitzvahs is to learn the Torah itself. But the second kind of mitzvah is to do the mitzvah, the mitzvot that the Torah says. You see. So therefore there's limud of Torah, the learning of the Torah, and there's asiyah, actually doing the mitzvah. But if you learn, that's one mitzvah. But it really has nothing to do with doing. You actually have to do the mitzvah of learning Torah. So what the Rambam said to Avram Avinu is stunning. He said that I'm going to consider learning about the korbanos, right, as if they did it. So the learning is equal to the doing, which is incredible. And this is what the Rambam told Avram Avinu, that if they learn about the Beit HaMikdash, right, I will consider it, and the korbanot, I will consider it as if they bring the korbanot, and obviously if they bring it, they will have a kapara, you see. Now, what is interesting, and this is also by Yecheskel, is that God said to Yecheskel that if they learn about the Beit HaMikdash, then I will consider it as if they build the Beit HaMikdash. You see? Same concept. So therefore, what is interesting is that it is actually possible to engage in either building the Beit HaMikdash or offering sacrifices, right, without the Beit HaMikdash at all. And this is provided by God in order to enable us, right, to be involved in kapara. So this is an incredible chiddush, that it is possible to get a kapara, an atonement, right, for everything, merely by learning about korbanos, you see. And certainly it's possible to build the Beis HaMikdash merely learning about the building itself. So that's what the Rebbe Shem did. That's what he answered him by Avram Avinu. Therefore, even though the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, you see, however, if they learn about the Korbanos, then I will consider it as if they had brought it. Now remember, this is the Rebbe Shem speaking. And obviously, if that's what he says, then that's the truth of the matter. You see, so this we learn out from the Chazal of Avram Avinu. Now we have the same type of Chazal in the Gemara, where Rabbi Yochanan says, it says in a pasuk, Zos Torat HaChatas. This is the law of the Chatas. Now it should have just said Zot Chatos. This is the Chatas, which means obviously the laws of a Chatas. Well, Chatas is a sin offering, by the way. So Rabbi Yochanan says that since it says this is the law of the Chatas, and doesn't say this is the Chatas, therefore, if you learn the law of Chatas, then it's as if you brought a Chatas. You see? So it's the second time we find what Avram Avinu said, what God said to Avram Avinu, that learning Korbanos, right, is as if you did the Korbanos. Now that has tremendous ramifications. What are they? One, therefore, learning about Korbanos, and by the way, a woman can ask, well, I don't learn about Korbanos. How would I take advantage? And the answer is that in the morning, and that is the reason why we have, after the Birchas HaShachar, you have the Akedah, and then you have Korbanos in the morning prayer in Shachris. Why is that? Because they made it part of the Shachris Siddur for this reason, that if you daven the Korbanos and you understand what you're saying, then it's considered as if you brought those Korbanos. Now think about what that means. It has a lot of different repercussions. One, you save a lot of money. Do you know what an animal costs to offer up in the Beis HaMikdash? It's a lot of money to bring a cow or to bring a goat or a sheep. You see? So if you could do the same thing by learning, then you could save yourself a tremendous amount of money when the Mashiach comes. You see? That's an interesting concept. But there are other things that you do when a person engages in understanding the whole concept of Korbanos, the offerings. One of them is that you are prepared for the Mashiach. Because since the Mashiach is going to build the Beis HaMikdash, especially the Mashiach ben Yosef, well, then you are familiar with the laws. You know exactly when you have to bring one, what you have to bring, you know, when and where and so on. So that's called a tremendous preparation for the coming of the Mashiach. You see? So that's the first idea. Another idea is even more important. Because if God sees that the Jews want the Beis HaMikdash, because they actually learn about the Beis HaMikdash, and that is considered as if they actually bring in sacrifices, then that will serve as what's called in English an inducement. It's an inducement. It's a something which will persuade God to build the Beis HaMikdash. Because when God sees that people want it, and they show that by knowing the laws and saying it in Shachris, let's say, and learning about it, that is a tremendous incentive for God to bring. And what it really does is it provides a tremendous merit for the Jews to get the Beis HaMikdash. And obviously, getting the Beis HaMikdash, right, is all about the Mashiach. Because obviously, the one who builds the Beis HaMikdash is the Mashiach ben Yosef, you see. So obviously, learning about that provides one with a tremendous merit that God sees, well, you want the Beis HaMikdash, so I will actually bring it about. You see? So that's a tremendous idea, you see, that it actually provides an inducement or incentive for God to bring the Beis HaMikdash, because he sees that people are not merely ignoring it. But like I said, one of the main ideas is that when you learn or you daven about the Beis HaMikdash, it provides a tremendous atonement or kapara. See? It's an amazing idea when you think about it, how you can have a kapara just by learning about korbanos. So this is certain very important ideas. So therefore, we can say that to learn about korbanos actually is one of the ways, and by the way, that's in Kachim, Seder Kachim, the Mishnais of Kachim. To learn about that actually provides one of the ways that it brings the Geula, the redemption, much closer, which is interesting. Most people don't think of it that way, but when you look at all these Chazals, you realize that this can actually happen, you see. Now, the question is, what is it really all about? You see, what is the essential idea of the Beis HaMikdash? Now, a great deal of it, obviously, most of the operations of the temple of the Beis HaMikdash is the korbanos, the sacrifices or the offerings. I mean, there are other things going on, but that was most of the activity of the Beis HaMikdash. And the question is, what is the logic of this? Why? You know, it's interesting that many religions of the ancient world, the Romans, the Greeks, they all had some form of sacrifices. In fact, the first one who offered a sacrifice was Adam Harishon, as the Chazal. And then Noach made a sacrifice, and Avram, and so on. So the question then is, what is the meaning behind the sacrifice? You see. And obviously, at least 90% of the activities in the Beis HaMikdash was all about korbanos. So that's the question. Well, there are many ideas, especially Kabbalistic ones, in terms of what the Beis HaMikdash does. But one of the important ideas is the following. And actually, we learn that from the Akedah. You see, in any case, there's a Medrash Chazal that says the following, that God said to various ideas or various entities, if a person sins, what should be done with him? It's almost like he consulted various different angels that represent different midas traits. Well, anyway, one of them answered, Din answered, right, that he has to die. You violated the word of God, so the proper punishment really is death. The question is why? That was one of the answers. The question is, why is that? And the answer to that is because, think about it. When a person does a mitzvah, what is he really doing? He's doing or acknowledging that it is the will of God that is supreme, and therefore I will do the mitzvah. It's a statement that God is supreme, and therefore I will do His will. And since His will is to do the mitzvah, right, and I will do the mitzvah, that means that you are acknowledging the supremacy of the will of God. But what happens, and therefore the reward for that, is that God will appear to you, since you believe His will is supreme, right, and therefore you exist because of Him. But what happens if a person sins? Then it's the opposite. then you are saying that it is the will of God is not supreme. There's also my will. There's what I want to do. And what I want to do is sin, right? Why? Because I believe, right, that I have a right to a will other than God. But what you're really saying is that the reason why I have a will other than God is because I exist independent of God. You see, that's really a statement. When a person sins, what he's really saying is I am entitled to my own will, right? And therefore, the reason for that is because I exist independent of God, and therefore I could do whatever I want. So what you're really testifying when you sin is that you feel that you exist independent of God. So what God then says to you, Mida keneged mida, measure for measure. If you feel that you exist independent of me, and therefore you could do whatever you want, then what I will do is I will withdraw, right, my sustenance from you, because you don't need me, right? You exist independent of me. So you don't need me to prop you up. So I will withdraw my sustenance, or that I sustain your existence. And of course, when God does that, then that individual will instantly annihilate, because he doesn't exist by himself. God creates and maintains the existence of everything, you see? So what a sin does, it's really a statement about who you think you really are. So if you make that statement that you exist independent of God, so God says, fine, then I will accede to your statement and I will disappear. And immediately you vanish. You see? So the concept, and that's why Din said, the concept of death, it's not that it's a punishment. The concept of death, right, is in conformity with what you said. You said you exist independent of God, and therefore you die, because God leaves, and then you're finished. You see? So that's the logic. If a person does a sin, which in essence means he does what his will says, then it's not that the punishment is death. The consequences of that statement is death. You see? That's the depth of what that medrash really says. So based on that, we now understand something very important, that the din is the real, true judgment of any sin is death. Not because of the severity of the sin, you see, or because of a punishment. No. It is a result of your statement that you believe you are independent of God, and therefore you are entitled to your own will. You see? So therefore, death is a logical conclusion to your testimony, your sin. That's a very important idea. So what did God do? Now we know that the world runs through din, or justice. What does that mean? That means God wants you to earn your olam haba, your future world. And that's what din is. What din is the concept of cause and effect. When you do something, that's a cause, and then there's an effect. That's justice. That's din. You see? The reverse of that, rachamim, is a suspension of din. It's when you really should have gotten something, the effect, but God does not allow that effect to take place. That's a very important idea. That in the end, din, or justice, demands termination, death. You see, because that's the logical conclusion or statement. You see. So what God realized, obviously, and this is the beginning of Bereshis, that this world can have no kiyum. It can't last with din. Obviously, because as soon as a person sins, he's dead. And obviously, the world cannot have a kiyum. It cannot have a fulfillment. It has no ability to permanently survive with that type of a characteristic. So what God did, and this is in the beginning, Rashi says this, God shituf, which means that he partnered din with rachamim. And rachamim, which means compassion or mercy, is a suspension of din. So even though a person rightly should die, God will not allow him to die, right? He doesn't care, and therefore he will not allow him to die. He will give him another chance down the line, down the road, in order to do tshuva. But if you think about it, but the din really is the right, is really the truth, not rachmim. Rachmim, you see, happen, mercy, compassion, in order to world to survive. But the true concept of justice is annihilation. So therefore, what God did is very interesting. He said that I want to be able to terminate a person because that's MS, and I am MS. But obviously, the world won't survive that way. So what I'm going to do is something very interesting. And this begins to provide the understanding of the whole concept of the Beis HaMikdash and Korbanos. And it's really the concept of the Ramban. The Ramban says this, is that when a person brings an animal or a bird or whatever, then he is supposed to imagine that really the sin should have killed me. That's what a person has to think. And by the way, this is the vidui. When you bring a korban, you are misvadeh. You put your hands on top of the head of the animal, right? And you say the vidui. You say a confession. And what do you say? That I sinned the following sin, right? And my axe was the axe of an animal. And really, I deserve not to live. However, God allowed me to substitute, the person says, his death for the death of the sacrifice. It comes out that the animal that you sacrifice is in lieu of you. Which is interesting. And that's what the Ramban says. That the korbanos is a way that a person can satisfy justice, which is death, or sacrifice to God, right? He can do that, right, as a substitute, as a surrogate, you see. And that's one of the main ideas of korbanos. And that's why every korban that you bring has what's called a vidui, basically, where you profess and you confess to the sin that you did, and you're saying that this animal should die instead of me. The person says, the animal should die, and that should be a kapara. And God actually created the wherewithal for a substitutional reality. That's why that animal really represents the owner of the cow, or whatever, the ox or whatever. You see, that's called a representational reality. So the reality of the Beis HaMikdash represents you, you see. And it is a way that you can actually die without dying, you see. So you can fulfill the true judgment or justice by bringing a sacrifice instead of yourself. You see? That's a very important concept because it explains the whole concept of the Beis HaMikdash, which is basically offerings or sacrifices, you see. And that's the difference. The religions of old, you see, on the Rome or Greece or any of the places that had temples, right, is they did it to appease the gods because they felt that the gods are always angry, whatever, and one has to appease them by offering sacrifices. The concept of a sacrifice in Judaism, which is the essential feature of the Beis HaMikdash, is not to appease God, but it is to fulfill the concept of justice, because God is a God of truth, you see. So as long as he can do it, then he can do it, which means that through the operations of the Beis HaMikdash, God allows him to survive. That's a very important concept, what the Beis HaMikdash really is. Now, this doesn't mean we understand all of the ideas or all of the actions in a korban. No, we don't. We don't understand why korbanos has to be this way and then that way, why it have to sometimes bring an ox, why a sheep. We don't understand why when you sprinkle the blood, and by the way, that's part of the kapara, where you take the blood of the animal and you sprinkle it on the mizbeach, on the altar. Because what you're really doing is saying that really I'm dedicating my life, the blood, the life blood, right, onto the altar, which represents God. You see, all of this is to conform to the justice. Now, we don't understand all the details. They are rooted in tremendous mysteries. You see, there are thousands and thousands of halachas, of laws in korbanos. I mean, the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah has 2 svarim with all the dinim. There are thousands and thousands of dinim, laws, concerning the sacrifices. Now, obviously, we don't understand why this korban has to go this way, these actions, and why that korban has these actions. We don't know. They're all rooted in tremendous mysteries. But what I'm telling you is the general understanding of what a korban is. You see, like I said, now where do we see this? We see this from the Akedah, because Avraham Avinu offered Yitzchak as a sacrifice. And then, of course, God says, don't do it, right? The Malach said, don't do it, right? So he took him off. But then it says, right, and Avraham Avinu saw, right, a idol, a ram, and he offered that ram. That's what it should say. But it says, and he offered that ram tachas benoi, instead of his son. Now, why does it say that? It should just say that he saw this ram entangled, right, in the bush. He took it, and he offered it. Finished. What's this tachas benoi? Why does it say instead of his son? And that's the idea, because that was a korban, the ayil. But what was the meaning of that korban, that ayil? And the answer is, it was a substitute for his son, which is what I'm saying, that really Yitzchak should have been slaughtered for whatever reason. But God allowed Avraham Avinu to use an animal instead of his son. You see? And from there you see the essential concept of korbanos. You see? It's a very important idea, and we see it from the Akedah, that when somebody is mechuyav, he's obligated to die for whatever reason, then he can actually substitute an animal. He should confess and substitute an animal for this. This is what we see from the Akedah Tachas Benoi instead of a son. We see the fundamental understanding, principle of korbanos. You know where you also see this? Last week was Parshas Shmini. And what was that? There were 8 days of celebration. And in the end, the Shekhinah, God's presence, rested on the handiwork of Moshe Rabbeinu on the Mishkan. And of course it was unbelievable. And the Medrash says that the day that the Mishkan was completed, that God had a simcha, so to speak, that was equal to the simcha when he created the world. That God did not have so great a simcha as he did when the Mishkan was completed. You see. And then right after that, we know there was the death of Nadav and Avihu, right? They brought strange fire, and therefore which was wrong, and they died, because God is very exacting right, with tzaddikim. And why do we have what's called this juxtaposition of these two events? And the idea is this: why was God so happy? The answer is that once you had the Mishkan, then you had the ability of somebody who sins, right, to do tshuva, not by his death, but by bringing a sacrifice. Therefore, the world can continue to exist. You see? So the Mishkan meant that mankind can continue to exist by using a method of substitution. And therefore the world will continue to exist, and then therefore the tikkun can be complete. And to show you how important that Mishkan was, Nadav and Avihu died, and that was mishpat, that was justice. You see? And that's what would have been had there been no Mishkan. That a person sins, he would die, because that is the absolute cause, or rather effect or consequence of somebody sinning, as I explained. You see? So the death of Nadav and Avihu is exactly what would happen to everybody without a Mishkan. So when the Mishkan was built, that offered everybody a substitute way, you see, to do tshuva, then that was an incredible joy to God. Why? Because that would mean that the world has a kiyum, can now continue to exist, and therefore the tikkun can be complete. You see? So that's one of the ideas of the Beis Hamikdash. This whole concept of that there is a substitute or a representational way, you see, for there to be that, you see. So therefore, that is a very important concept. So therefore, korbanos, you see, korbanos then is one of the ways of actually bringing the Mashiach, which is interesting. Most people don't look at it that way, you see. Now, that's a very important concept, you see. Now, besides that, another way to bring the Mashiach is do not speak Lashon Hara. And I mentioned many times, long time ago, why? Because the problem is when a person speaks Lashon Hara, then the Satan has the ability to prosecute that person, measure for measure. You speak Lashon Hara, so you condemn through your words of Lashon Hara, right? You condemn another person. So the Satan has the ability or the right, measure for measure, justice, to condemn you. So therefore, his condemnation is what? Is a kitrug, prosecution. You see? Now the problem is that Jews speak Lashon Hara, and because of that, they're always being judged in heaven. Now, the Chavetz Chaim says, if a person does not speak Lashon Hara, so then he brings the Geula much closer. Why? Because if you don't speak Lashon Hara, it's very difficult for the Satan to prosecute you, you see. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, why you live a long time. Because since you don't get prosecuted, because you don't speak Lashon Hara, you will hardly ever be judged. And therefore you will live a long time, you see. So therefore, one of the ways of bringing Mashiach is stop speaking Lashon Hara, and therefore you will not be judged. And because you are not judged, you will live a long time, and Klal Yisrael will be zocher to the Mashiach. And the truth is, that's exactly what we saw happen in Egypt. We know that the Jews were supposed to be there 400 years, but they were only there 210. So the Satan, right, and the reason why they were in Egypt is because they spoke Lashon Hara. Like Moshe Rabbeinu said, he saw one Jew hitting another Jew, right? And he said to him, Rasha, why are you hitting your judge, that other person? And then he made a statement, Oche noida dova, surely the matter is known. Now, normally the pshat is, surely the matter that I killed the Egyptian will be known to Pharaoh, to Paro. But Rashi says that's not what he said. What he really said was, why is that the Jews are so punished terribly? And the answer is because they speak Lashon Hara. Because this person that he said, why are you hitting your fellow Jew? That person answered him, well, are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian? And he revealed that to Parai. And that was Mesira. So Moshe Rabbeinu realized that's why the Jews are in Golus, because they speak Lashon Hara. And because of that, they're always being judged. And therefore the Gula does not come. Therefore, the remedy for that was, don't speak Lashon Hara. Yes. And because the Jews did not speak Lashon Hara, as a result of that, they were redeemed. In other words, the Sultan was up there prosecuting the Jews and saying, what do you mean you can't take them out? They've only been there 210 years. They got another 190 years to go, right? So therefore, it says 3 times in the Medrash, Lo nigalu Yisrael miMitzrayim, ela b'shor shelo hoya behen diltoya. The reason why the Jews were redeemed in Egypt is because they stopped speaking Lashon Hara, which is amazing. Therefore, what that says is that for some reason, the Jews in Egypt stopped speaking Lashon Hara, and that is why they were redeemed from Egypt. Why? Because if they stopped speaking Lashon Hara, there was no prosecutions in heaven. So the Sultan could not say anything in terms of the fact that they were only there 210 years. So it comes out that the fact that the Jews did not speak Lashon Hara is the basic reason why they were able to be redeemed from Egypt. Now, what is interesting is when they were at the Yam Suf, right, they started complaining and saying, what do you mean? They saw the Egyptian army and they were frightened. And they said, well, why did you bring us out here? Because there are no graves in Egypt? Because the Egyptians want to bring us back to Egypt and enslave us. They were complaining against God. That's Lashon Hara. So Moshe Rabbeinu said, very interestingly, he said, Yisyatzu uru'u, stand back and watch es Yeshua Hashem, salvation of God. Hu yilochim lochem, he will fight for you. V'atem tachrishon, but be silent. Now the question is, why did he say be silent? He should have just said, right, and God will save you. What does it mean, be silent? Because he said, it's very important, that the whole reason why you were able to get out of Egypt, the merit, was that you didn't speak Lashon Hara, right? And therefore there was no kitrugim. But if you continue speaking Lashon Hara against God, why did he take us out to be killed by the Egyptians? That's Lashon Hara. Where's your emunah? Where's your bitochen, right? So if you speak Lashon Hara, so then the Sultan can argue against you and say, wait a minute, you can't go out. You still got another 190 years to go. Therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu said, V'atem tachrishon, you have to be silent. You do not want to speak Lashon Hara, because that's going to allow the Sultan to prosecute you, and the whole Geula will be nullified. That's why he said it. Therefore, we see very clearly that the second way to bring Mashiach is not to speak Lashon Hara. Therefore, there's no prosecutions. And as there's no prosecutions, then we can be redeemed also. So that is the second way that Chazal say, and the Chavetz Chaim says, that if Jews do not speak Lashon Hara, they will be redeemed just like it happened in Egypt. See, they will also be redeemed, which is a very, very important concept. So I have offered 2 different ways. One is to be very careful with not speaking Lashon Hara. As we see, that's what brought the Jews out of Egypt, right? And the second thing, right, is not only that, but the second thing is learn Korbanos. When you daven Shachris in the morning, say the sections that talk about the offerings of the Beis Hamikdash. That will be considered as if you have, learned. That will be considered as if you had done these things. You see, and as a result of that merit, it's considered as if you have done the korbanos. That merit will allow you to be redeemed. You see? So, those are basically two ways that you can actually bring Mashiach to the concept of the Beis Hamikdash. Any questions?
Also, Rabbi, the Ketoret is also before Aleinu. It's 2 times in Shacharit.
Say that again?
The prayers about the sacrifices, it's again repeated before Aleinu in Shacharit, so you read it 2 times in the morning.
Yes, exactly. That's why they put those prayers, by the way. Yeah, that's why they put those tefillas in chakras, because it's one of the ways of getting an atonement.
And also it's again repeated in Mincha.
Yes, correct.
Why does it say it 2 times in the morning?
Why does it say what?
Why do we say it twice in the morning?
Because the 2 major sacrifices in the Beit HaMikdash, what's called the Korban Tomed. And those 2 sacrifices were critical. You see? So the Shachrit one is called the Tomed Shel Shachris. It was the Korban that it was a communal sacrifice, right? That the Jews brought in the morning in the Beis Hamikdash. It was a community sacrifice. So that's Shachrit. And the second Korbanos is by Mincha, which they brought in the afternoon. You see? That's why by Ma'ariv there's no Korbanos. You see? But those 2 Korbanos are the major Korbanos of the Beit HaMikdash. And we say them in lieu of them, we say in Shachris and also in Mincha. You see?
My question is, why do we say it?
Why what?
Why in Shacharit do we say it twice?
Well, actually, because the second one is basically about the Keturis, right? And that we offer also as a kapara, the Keturis, the incense, right? That's the second one. So you have the offerings in the morning.
Times.
What was that?
Ketoret is 2 times.
Well, you say the Keturis before Mincha, right? Because you also want the kapara. The Keturis was a kapara for Lashon Hara. You see. So it's not only korbanos, but you also want to have an atonement for Shmirat HaLashon, for Lashon Hara. You see?
No, but Amy's question is why do we say it right after Birkat HaShachar and once again right before we finish, right before the Aleinu? Why is it 2 times the same prayer?
I'm trying to understand what you're asking. Why do we say korbanos in the morning?
We say it
2
twice.
times.
We say right after Birkat HaShachar, and then also again in Shacharit, we say right before Aleinu. So why do we need to say it twice in the morning?
Yes, so what I'm saying is that the emphasis in the one in the morning, not by Mincha, that's, like I said, is you want to say the korbanos. That's the major emphasis. It repeats an entire, in Masechtas Zvachim, Perek Hey. It brings down all the sacrifices. But the main emphasis is on the sacrifices. And the second part of Shachrit, the main emphasis is a kapora for Lashon Hara. You know?
I'm still not getting the answer. It's still not answering the question.
No, Rachel, he is. He's saying the first part in the morning is for regular sins that you do. And then the second part is for specifically Lashon Hara.
Lashon Hara.
Yes. In fact, in the Beit HaMikdash in Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol went inside the Holy of Holies, right? And what he did there is he offered incense on the in the Mizbeach HaZohav. Okay, and the question is why? And the answer is because the Jewish people needed a kapara for Lashon Hara. Could you imagine the holiest man at the holiest time and the holiest place? And what was the essential avodah, procedure or service in the Holy of Holies? And that was to atone for Lashon Hara. That's how great it was that they needed a kapara. Because that stops the prosecutions of the Satan. And therefore that is the most damaging to the Jewish people. As we know, because the second Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, the Gemara says, because of Sinat Chinam. Right? And the Chofetz Chaim and the Mashal, great commentaries, say that it wasn't baseless hatred that destroyed the second Beit HaMikdash. It was the Lashon Hara that is caused by baseless hatred. That's what destroyed the second temple. You see? So we see how important it is not to speak Lashon Hara. In fact, I might as well add that in Rosh Hashanah we have how many koles? 100, right? I think the Sfardim have 100 too.
Yeah.
Okay. Why? So Ramchal, Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto says that the first third, which is 30, second is 30, third is 30, right? Each one is for each one is for one avera, where you are obligated to die, let yourself die instead of transgressing. That's Gilu Arayis, adultery, Shvichas Dom, murder, and Avodah Zarah, idolatry. That leaves 10 unexplained, because that has 90, but we blow 100. So the last 10 is a kapara for Lashon Hara. Could you imagine that Rosh Hashanah needs 10 out of the 613 commandments? 3 I've explained, and the one left, right, is Lashon Hara. So could you imagine how powerful Lashon Hara is as one of the major damaging agents of the Jewish people? And then when it comes to Yom Kippur, right, the incense was used as a kapara for Lashon Hara. So could you imagine that on both of these days you need a major kapara for Lashon Hara? You see. And therefore the Chofetz Chaim says that is, and that's why the second Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, because of Lashon Hara, which produced baseless hatred. But that was the real sin, you see. And like I said, the Jews were redeemed from Egypt. Why? Because they did not speak Lashon Hara. Very important idea, you see.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yeah.
So you said when Bnei Israel was asking Moshe at the Yam Suf, why did Hashem take us out, that was as if they were saying Lashon Hara about Hashem. So
yes, they were complaining.
Right.
Yeah,
so
they were implying. What was that?
So when a person complains in their life, in their own life, why is this happening to me, so on so forth, is that as if they're speaking Lashon Hara about Hashem?
Well, remember one thing. Lashon Hara is, you have to say it to somebody else. If you say it to yourself, that's not called Lashon Hara. That's called a Chison Emunah.
No, let's say they're talking to somebody. They're saying, I don't know why this is all happening to me. Why is Hashem doing this to me? What do I have to, I don't understand. Like, people complaining.
Yes, that is Lashon Hara. Yes. Because the implication is that God is wrong. God is not just, unjust. And that is why it's happening. But that's Lashon Hara, exactly. When a person complains to others in other people's presence that the acts of God are not just, that God is wrong or whatever, yes, a person is speaking Lashon Hara against God. Correct. But if you say it to yourself, that is not called Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara is a sin of communications. Right. So if you talk to yourself, that you're not talking to somebody else, So therefore, that's not Lashon Hara. What it is, of course, is a deficiency in belief in God, in bitochen, in trust in God, obviously. But that's true.
I wanted to ask you if you could elaborate a little more about the when the Beit HaMikdash Shlishi comes, about the portal that we step into.
Well, like I had mentioned, the essential idea is that the third Beit HaMikdash is not built by man. That's why they were destroyed. In fact, the first Beit HaMikdash actually was called the Mishkan, right? That was not destroyed either. Why? Because it was built by Moshe Rabbeinu, right? And the presence of God actually came onto that. We know, because it says, and the presence of God dwelt on that. So those things were never destroyed. They were much too holy. The other two Beit HaMikdash, the first and the second, they were destroyed because they were built by man. The third Beit HaMikdash is basically built by God. And what I elaborated on last week is that what that really is, when God builds it, what that really is the Beit HaMikdash L'mayla becomes physicalized, becomes a physical entity. And therefore, the residence of God, or the presence of God, as he appears up high in Olam Yetzirah, will be manifest here in this world, which is Olam Asiyah. And as a result of that, that type of presence produces an astounding revelation of God, which will automatically mean that this world will be filled with the knowledge of God. So in that sense, it's like the upper world of Yetzirah actually has been brought down to this world. You see? So it's like a doorway into Olam Yetzirah. And therefore, the results are beyond our imagination. We cannot even begin to understand what happens. You see? And what I'm providing is an understanding of why this happens. Or rather, what is the operating principle? And the operating principle is that the upper Beis HaMikdash now becomes our Beis HaMikdash here. And therefore it brings down here in this world all the environment of the upper one, which is Olam Yetzirah. And therefore we are privy to a revelation, a gilui, which is unimaginable. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, you make us want it to happen right away.
I know. Doesn't that increase the desire? Yeah. Look, I mentioned that the Midrash at the end of Kohelet says that the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu is luft, is empty air, compared to the Torah of the Mashiach. And we're not talking about heaven, we're talking about this world, but the Kedusha of when the Mashiach comes it is unimaginable. What can I tell you? We cannot even comprehend. And we're not even talking about Olam Haba, you see? We're not talking about any of that. We're talking about a physical appearance of the Beis HaMikdash, except it is really of another world. It's like another world came down, became part of ours. So therefore that is an entry, it's a doorway into that upper world. But meanwhile, what pours out of that doorway into our world is a world which we cannot even begin to be masik. You see, we cannot even begin to really understand it. And that's how it happens. What was that?
This will pour out into the whole entire world, or only pour out into Israel?
No, it'll pour out into the entire world. However, there will be boundaries, and so on. There will be different sections. Jerusalem will become enlarged to fill the entire Eretz Israel. You see, and then the rest of the world will be like Eretz Yisrael. The whole planet changes because the divine presence now fills the entire earth. Like it says, Kimola Oretz Deo. The whole Oretz, the whole world, becomes filled with the knowledge and the presence of God. It's not something that we can imagine. Remember, there's no death. There's no Satan. It's all gone. All there is unimaginable holiness. That's all there is, you see. And that affects the entire planet. And that's before everything begins changing in the year 6000. After that, the entire universe changes. You know? Well, it certainly is something to look forward to, that's for sure.
So, Rabbi, I have a question. So, if Mashiach ben Yosef brings down the Beit HaMikdash, then when does Mashiach ben David come in?
Well, he's supposed to come in after there's when the Beit HaMikdash, and then there's a war. That's the Gog and Magog, where the world realizes.
The war happens after the Beit HaMikdash is already here?
It would seem that that itself is not clear, but it seems to be perhaps that when the Beit HaMikdash is in the beginning stages, let's say, then that war would happen. I mean, obviously, when it's manifest, when it's built, and it has those properties, obviously that's the end of the whole hatred of the Jew. But in the beginning stages, when there is a Mashiach ben Yosef, and he begins to gather the exiles, remember, Misham Yikabetzcho, that's when the war is supposed to basically happen, where evil tries to make its last comeback. What?
I thought you said the Holocaust could be the Gog and Magog war.
Well, what the Holocaust certainly did is it lessened the terrible impact of the end of time. You know, that's what it did. But it's not necessarily the war of Gog and Magog. But what it did do, because it says that in the last war of Gog and Magog, only 1 or 2 families of a city will survive. That's how bad, to bring dinam, to bring the world up to its justice, does take that, unfortunately. However, what the Rebbe did is he used the Holocaust to absorb almost all of that type of suffering. And that's really what happened. Only a couple of people in any given city survived. All the cities were wiped out. All the Jews in the cities were wiped out, you know. So therefore that did happen. But that's really what it did. It enormously reduced the suffering of the end. That's really what it did. And I believe that's why the Holocaust was so bad. It didn't have to be that bad. It could have just been a war, basically, of the entire world. Why did it have to be such an unbelievable, brutal war? I mean, the Jews, you know, they were like, it was just incredible. Everything about the Jew was used. His ashes, his skin, it was just unbelievable. And I believe because what God did is he added, which he does by many times. If somebody has to go through suffering, what God will do is add suffering from some other sin that he would not have gotten now. But once God is bringing suffering on him, right? So what God does is he adds to the punishment itself, even though that the punishment which is coming is because of a sin which is not as severe, but God will add to that punishment. You see, you find that by the Chet Egel and the Meraglim, where God says, you know, in every generation I will add part of the punishment of the Chet Egel. In other words, the punishment that they get is for a reason, but God will add punishments which are due for previous sins, you see, to balance everything. And he does that many times. So the Holocaust is one of those examples. Well, the Holocaust in and of itself didn't have to be as that severe, you see. But God made it much more severe because what he did is he took all the debt that the Jews had in terms of punishments that they deserved, and he just added it to the brutality of the Holocaust. That is why the Holocaust will have reduced enormously the suffering that the Jews will have at the end of time in order to balance the books. You see. So that's what it does do. Yes, that's what it does. You know? Anyway, all of this is happening.
Rabbi, what do you think about Israel cyber attacking the nuclear plant of Iran, and Iran said that they reserve the right to retaliate?
They've been saying that for years, and they don't retaliate.
Yesterday.
Yeah, what did they do exactly? They destroyed what? What exactly did they do?
They were revving up producing uranium, and
the
Israel did something that destroyed their mechanism, the computers, and it caused a lot of damage.
How many years did it set them back?
I don't know. They said a lot. And they said, right now this is an act of terrorism and we will retaliate.
Well, it is. It's an act of war. But that's what happens when Iran threatens the existence of Israel. But that doesn't mean anything. All it is talk. Look, Iran does not want to start a war with Israel because they know that Israel can destroy the mullahs. They know that. So really it's very bad for Iran because their whole credibility as a powerful nation is in the garbage. You know, they are really they are caught between a rock and a hard place. You see, because they cannot retaliate on Israel because they realize that Israel can destroy them. I mean, could you imagine what it is for a country to go into another country and wipe out a major security installation and nuclear, nuclear devices? You imagine the intelligence that Israel has, and Iran realizes that Israel knows everything that they're doing, and therefore they are afraid. You see? So that this is just talk to look like they're brave and to look like they're powerful. But really, how many times has Israel done this to Iran? Many times. And they cannot retaliate. What do? They retaliate by trying to do something with a ship. I heard Israel took out a ship also in the Persian Gulf. Some spy ship. But whatever it is, all it is bravado talk. What?
It's true.
Yeah.
They did knock out a ship.
Yeah, they knocked out a ship. So all of this is just, look, they have to do something or else they lose face. Obviously. Here's Iran that's trying to, display themselves as the mighty Iranian empire. And meanwhile, Israel is wreaking havoc with them. And they can't do anything. What's interesting is even though Trump is not around, because then they were really afraid, they can't even do it with Biden because they're afraid of Israel. They don't want to start a war with Israel because Israel can take them out. That's why. Sure. But look, Israel has to do it, especially with Biden giving money to the PLO, Biden that wants to give money to Iran. They have to do it. And they're doing it. It's amazing when you think about it. I mean, the whole world must stand in awe of what Israel is doing to Iran. How a small country like Israel, can do this. How sophisticated their intelligence must be, and their war and military ability must be. I'm sure the whole world is in awe of them. No nation could do this. But, yeah, I believe there will be a war between Iran and Israel eventually. Because it's only a matter of time till Iran realizes that they're losing tremendous amount of respect in the nations of the world, you see, and that they will conduct a war. And I believe that Israel will wipe them out and get rid of all of them, at least the infrastructure, that's for sure. You know what I mean?
So if this month Iyad is Ani Hashem Rofecha,
yes,
and the whole point of Sefirat HaOmer with 49 days when Bnei Israel was in the Midbar was so that Hashem would heal them and they would release the Zohama and they were all healed before Matan Torah.
Correct.
Could we be on any trajectory to that type of, like, is there any hope in Shavuot, like, that something could happen in that, not that form, but if something could happen in that way?
Yes. Look, you have to remember, v'nahapechu, that whatever is going to happen with the Geula is going to happen overnight and instantly, and the world will wake up stunned. That's the way so far things happen, you see, that out of nowhere, something drastic happens. And this is what's going to happen. There will come a time when it's over. The tikkun will have been accomplished, and the Jewish people will be worthy of redemption. And in that instant time, not a second later, something will happen historically that the world will be stunned. We just don't know when. But it will happen. And when it does, it's going to come out of nowhere. You know? But it will happen. Hopefully very soon.
What does
because
that mean?
All of this. What was that?
What does it mean, like, historically something would happen? Like, could you give an example? Not that that's going to happen, but, like, something like what? Like, what are we thinking? What are we...
Well, for instance, you know, like the fall of communism happened in 3 days. You know, I don't know if you recall, but they overthrew communism in 3 days. Who would ever predict that communism, which was so steadfast, was overthrown in 3 days? Who ever heard of that?
Maybe the fall.
Maybe what?
The fall of Biden.
Maybe.
If
Biden
could fall in 3 days, would be good too.
Well, then you're inviting Harris.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, they let them both fall at the same time.
Well, maybe. Maybe. You never know. Look, it's not a big deal for the Rabbi Shem to end evil. We just have to deserve it. And when it happens, it'll happen overnight. The world will be stunned. You know, it's like the 6-Day War. Remember 1967? When they were all attacked by Egypt and everybody. And all of a sudden, in 6 days, Israel had Jerusalem back. They had the Kessin back. The world was stunned. Out of nowhere. They had everything back. You see? That's the way the redemption happens. Out of nowhere. And the next minute, you're free.
And does the Mashiach have to be here? Do we know that the Mashiach is here before that scenario happens, or that scenario happens first, and then we see who the Mashiach is?
I would imagine that these things will happen while the Mashiach is here. You know, the real question is he released from his klipa after or before? That's unknown. But I believe he certainly is here. You know, he's not going to be born later. He's here. The real question is, he can't be released. Just like Moshe Rabbeinu. It took him 80 years to get out of that klipa. You know?
How do we know he's not out of it?
We don't know. We don't know where he stands. Maybe. We don't know.
Maybe he's telling Hashem to pick somebody else.
Maybe he's what?
No.
Maybe he's telling Hashem, pick somebody else.
Well, that's Moshe Rabbeinu tried that.
Didn't work.
Didn't work too well. It didn't work too well. No. I think
to get to Israel, so let's hope he didn't say that.
That's right, yeah. Look, like I say, it'll be stunning. When it happens, it'll come out of nowhere. That's how the Geula works. Just like Haman. One day he was on top of the world, and on the next day he was hanging. Out of nowhere.
And we're close, right? We're close. And to anticipate
I believe we are very close. And one of the ideas is you are watching America and the world engaged in behavior which is not just immoral, but it's uncivilized. There's a difference. America is concerned, it's unbelievable what's going on, with gender and racism, and they are making laws which are insane because they do not resemble a civilization. America is dying as a civilization, you see. And therefore, I believe we're at the end. It's like
Rabbi, I was driving on the West Side Highway, and there was like a huge sign on the FDR. You know the Manhattan storage closets that people rent for storage?
Yeah.
So it said on this huge sign, it said, we might have few closets in NYC, but at least we have we made a lot of closets for our children to come out of.
Terrible.
We make
because gays coming out of the closet.
Oh, you mean that? Yeah, of course, yeah.
But huge, Rabbi,
on the newspaper.
It was huge. It's like
was a huge sign, right?
Over. Yeah, huge, Rabbi. You drive on the FDR. It's right in front of your face. It's like the Satan right in your face. It was repulsive.
Yeah, and
the Rabbi in the newspaper was very upsetting in New York. A woman is going to court to fight the courts to be able to marry her adult son.
Really?
I never heard of such a thing. And how they're taking this to court, I have no idea. It's incest. It's really Sodom.
Yeah, it's mamish incest. Oh, that's unbelievable. She wants to marry her adult son.
It's disgusting.
Well, that's it. That is what's called the bottom of the barrel. And we're watching that. And the problem is this is not going to stop. It's going to get worse. You know, you can get worse where you're able to marry your pet. You know, why not? Yeah, you can marry your dog or whatever.
But it's the same door of it has to be the same door of Sodom.
Yes, it is. That's why God destroyed Sodom not only because it was immoral, but it was uncivilized. This is not a civilization. Man has left sanity, you know, and therefore God said, this is not what I want. So he singled out Sodom and he destroyed it. God will not tolerate, it's one thing to tolerate homosexuality and so on, but it's another thing to tolerate, uncivilized behavior. Because the problem is America is a symbol for the entire world. This is the problem. So if America wins, if a kid 10 years old can decide, is he a boy or girl, that's the end of mankind. That's what's happening. If this woman wins her case and is able to marry her son, then you've opened up the floodgates of incest. Then anybody can marry anybody. You know what I'm saying? You can have 3 people getting married. Why only 2? Why not 3? What's the difference really, Then it's a Hefgewelt. It's completely chaos. God will not tolerate that, as I said. So therefore, I believe we are at the end. Because of that, that's a very strong sign.
But are we going to get destroyed with them?
No.
In Sodom, everybody got destroyed. Do we get destroyed with them?
No. Sodom was destroyed, but not the entire world. But this is the problem, like I say. Focus on the uncivilized aspect of what the world has become. Like I say, it's not moral. It's the world has turned into murderers where you can kill a kid, within 24 hours of its birth. That's infanticide. That's ritzicha, where a child can determine what gender it is, or anybody can marry anybody, and you can't even discriminate because then they can take you to court. You know what I'm saying? In other words, that's the norm. The norm is that, you cannot refer to anybody's gender. They're taking away pronouns, There's no him, his, her. It's all gone. You know what I'm saying?
No mom, no dad.
Would you believe this? This is psychotic. No mom, no dad. What do you call them, parents?
I don't know.
It's psychotic thinking. It's what's called, it's like the patients in the insane asylum has taken over the asylum. The patients now run the asylum. No longer are there doctors. Yeah, so everybody's abnormal. So they will condone abnormal behavior, you see? And God will not tolerate that. That's really why we're really at the end, because there's no reversal to this. It will not change. And the second thing, not only will not change, but America is a leader among the world. And if America does this, everybody's going to follow. That's what's going to happen. Europe, everywhere. And that's it. Mankind is on a downward spiral to the end. And the Bosham will not allow that. That's, I believe, why darkness has come to the world in order to balance the books of justice. And he's going to bring the Mashiach. And you'll see, you're going to wake up one morning and something will have happened that will have stunned the entire world. And that is the beginning of the end.
Wow.
And I believe
Inshallah, God willing.
Yeah, I believe it's soon. I believe it's